There's a pervasive problem, I think, amongst those that are trying to endeavor into anything. I know that's very, 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 very broad, but you'll understand what I mean in a second. Any kind of hobby, activity, sport, adventure, there's a problem that I've noticed amongst those today that did not necessarily exist even a generation ago. And this problem is what I call the Reddit problem, or the issue with Reddit. And here's the crux of the issue. If you were to pick up an activity today, I'll say you want to get into, I'll say running, okay? A decade ago, 2 decades ago, you would buy a pair of sneakers and you would probably just start running, right? You probably just start going for jogs in the morning. You'd start running, maybe find a buddy. Maybe if you're really into it, you might look into, on the internet, maybe like the top running shoes, and maybe you might subscribe to a running magazine. If you were really like the top percentage of people who went for runs. But nowadays, we have forums like Reddit that hyper specialize in activities. So what happens is you'll get a beginner, for say again, someone that wants to learn how to run, and instead of just going through and actually just running every day and just kind of keeping sort of the fun, keeping kind of the initial fun, and slowly developing and learning things about the activity as they went on, what happens now is you get this information overload right at the beginning. You have someone that goes, okay, I want to run a run. So you go to some sort of Reddit forum on running, and then they got everything. They got this hyper specialization on stride rate, stride length, how to strike the ground with your foot properly to prevent like shin splints or issues. You've got the proper breathing technique when you run, the proper positioning of your foot and your leg and your knee as you run, as you hit the ground. It becomes so hyper specialized that it's amazing for those that are very, very adept in an activity. The problem is that in the beginning, you read all these things and you get freaked out. You read them and you go, oh my God, there's everything, you go down this giant rabbit hole and you become overwhelmed with the activity. You overthink everything, even the simplest of things that you don't necessarily need to worry about in the beginning. You don't have to, worry about hitting the ground with the exact position that your foot needs to touch, the heel to toe thing and all that stuff. You don't have to worry about that in the beginning. You just need to run, right? You just need to get the actual activity and practice of just doing the activity underneath your belt. And then as things go on, okay, start to maybe look at your form and all that stuff as things go on, and that's something you would get maybe some decades earlier. You would just gradually sort of learn this. You'd hear it through maybe buddies that run, maybe get some sort of advice here and there. It was a very gradual thing. With all the information being thrown at you at the very start, though, you get this sort of freezing, right? This sort of like mental shock that comes to you. You get that analysis paralysis and all that. And the writing field is obviously no different to this. And I do worry that you get writers that start off very, very early on in the process of writing, where before, for me, and I think for a lot of people that maybe grew up, say in the 90s, you started writing probably because you read books, right? You read books and you enjoyed them, and you started writing, and you probably copied authors that you liked. You probably tried to write like maybe the authors that you enjoyed. I always tend to use the example of Harry Potter because everyone seems to have read that. You read Harry Potter, maybe you start writing like J.K. Rowling, your first little stories when you're like a teenager or whatever, and as things go on, as you sort of go through the process, you kind of refine your technique and all that stuff. Nowadays, I think there's a worry for writers, and it's not just Reddit that does this. This is YouTube as well. I'm in some ways a culprit of this. I imagine if someone just listened to my stuff every single day, yeah, I mean, I hope the advice is broad enough that it wouldn't lead you to some sort of analysis paralysis. But as YouTube itself, basically, and just contributing to that, the overall author tube and writer tube and all that stuff, it creates the same thing. You get someone that will go on these things, and they'll watch 10 different videos right at the very start. You get someone that maybe has not even 6 months of writing underneath their belt, and they're already looking at techniques to improve dialogue, techniques to improve description, 15 tips to improve the pacing of your story, how to create more complex characters, how to create characters that are, how to create a great villain, how to create a great hero, how to create an anti-hero, how to write a hero that has, a moral gray area. And you get to 15 of these videos here in a setting, and all of a sudden, now, what do you do, right? Where do you go from there? Because you can't focus on one of them. And to be honest, if you get 6 months underneath your belt, and this is the bigger point, just focus on writing things that say what you want them to say. Focus on that. Focus on the very, very bare bones basics. Don't stress so much about having to create these super complex characters, about having to, improve your dialogue right off the bat. Write and just focus on the habit of writing, building that habit, and just focus on writing clearly and perhaps succinctly if you can. Do that first. Master that basics first, and that really goes. I think again, I was speaking kind of a broader thing of just doing activities and not so much hyper focusing. But if you're a writer, that's, especially in the beginning, that's really what your goal is. Just speaking clearly and making sure that your work says what you want it to say, because it's such a foundational idea that you get these people that will go through and they'll try and craft these super complex characters in their first stories, and yeah, maybe you got an interesting character, maybe you do, maybe you have a very genuinely interesting character, but can you create the scenes well? Can you show the scenes they are in effectively? Yes, that you may have the general idea of having good motivations, about coming up with good justifications for the character and all that stuff, but can you actually show it on the page for the reader? Can you make it entertaining? And that's often where you fail. That's often where the challenge comes in. And it's not because you haven't studied enough. It's not because you didn't go down the rabbit hole, enough or whatever. It's simply because you don't have just an overall basic foundation of writing. My day job right now, I'll just, actually, at this point I'll just say it. So my day job right now, I'm a personal trainer, and you get people that will come in and they'll say, hey, where's my weakness on this lift, right? I might get someone that maybe comes in and wants to focus on their squat. Oh, where's my weakness here on this lift, thinking that, okay, maybe I have a deficiency in my quads, maybe I have a deficiency in my hamstrings are being underactive. And you get someone, they haven't been, they've been training for 6 months, and I'll look at them and I'll go, your weakness is everything. You have not developed sufficient muscle in any of these areas to be able to start doing these lifts at a maximal level. Focus more on hypertrophy. Focus more on getting the neuromuscular patterns down for the lifts first, and then let's focus. And then let's start specializing on, hey, maybe you're on the squat here. Maybe your hamstrings are underdeveloped. All right, good. We need to start maybe finding ways to do some exercises to maybe develop them more, so that way you don't had that sticking point at maybe the bottom of the squat, just as an example. And so, as a writer, that's the general idea I'm trying to convey, is that do not get sucked into this rabbit hole. Don't get pulled into this sort of Reddit forum idea. Instead, focus on just being succinct and clear with what you're working on, and writing what you want to write, and writing works that are clear and that say what you want them to say. Just the very basics first. There's time later to focus and to refine.